Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet, where I cover the latest news on Manchester United in a concise and straightforward fashion. First, I want to talk about some of the news that's actually out there right now, most of it being a bit rehashed on the manager front, and then we will get into transfers as I have quite a bit to talk about there and go over, and there's some real interesting things that I think people need to think with in terms of our strategy as well as the targets. But first, I just want to say this. Most of the news you've seen today, and I'll get into that in more detail, is mostly rehashed. It's the same thing as it's been. There's not much new. Ten Hag is still preferred. The interview has already occurred. He's ahead in the race, and frankly, nothing has changed there. However, what keeps getting stated is that nothing is imminent, and I want to clarify something. As I keep talking about, there's a little bit of a split. And it's not that this is a totally bad thing, but as I've said many times, the way that United operate is that there's football people and they have business people. And there's actually two boards. You have a football board, which is composed of Murtaugh, Fletcher, people from the recruitment team, and others. And you have, and it could be called a board. They may not call it a board, but it's basically a board. You have these people, they have their say, they have their part, they have their votes, and they come up with targets, decisions, etc. from a footballing standpoint. Then you have the business board, and this is mostly composed of the Glazers. And the CEO, formerly Ed Woodward, now Richard Arnold, represents that as sort of the front-facing name and face to that board, and is the go-between between the two boards. So when the football people make a decision, they present it to Ed Woodward in the past, now Richard Arnold, who brings it up to all of the Glazers, to the decision makers, who all have to come to a conclusion, approve and sign off on any sort of decision being made, any sort of spend, any sort of purchase, any sort of signing, all of it. That's why things are slow. That's why things are slow with United. That's why they're always slow. The football people aren't said, here's 100 million, go do what you want to do with it, get the deals done, figure it out. It's more like every single decision and every single part still has to be approved, still has to be discussed, and there still has to be consensus, and the people in the business board have their own advisors as well who tell them things, direct them on decisions and from different purposes, and mostly to do with money. So all that's really happening at the moment is there's just not total consensus on all of the parts of what could be appointing Erik ten Hag as the next manager. It doesn't mean anything's gone wrong. The simple fact of it is that there's differences between the two. Pochettino would cost more money. He's got higher wages. He's asking for a lot more as part of transfers. Not just talking about Harry Kane. He wants big movement there, and they're all presenting different kind of plans. Ten Hag is preferred by some and is the popular choice. As I've stated before, and you can argue with me if you want on this, it's totally fine. My view has been, and information has been, that a lot of it is that both Ten Hag and Pochettino are well appreciated by the football people. Pochettino is a little more, but Ten Hag is more preferred by the board. He's the popular choice. There's been talk from both Luckhurst and Arnold in the next, Luckhurst and Mitten in the last few days about Richard Arnold and what he's doing. Andy Mitten says that he wants to make his mark on the footballing side. Luckhurst says that he's viewing fan forums and talking with the Fan Advisory Council and taking a lot of fan opinion into account. Ten Hag being preferred by fans and being popular does make it easier to sell upstairs to the board than, say, a Pochettino if people didn't want him. It just does, and it is a factor. Whether it should be or not is another story. But regardless, if and when they reach consensus between the two boards, and Ten Hag is still ahead in this isn't like a big Pochettino thing, Ten Hag is still ahead in this, it'll go fast. It'll go quick. It'll get out there. A lot of people are saying things like, because it's taking time, that means they're waiting for Pochettino. And you might think I'd agree with that, but I don't. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think if it takes a long time, then it starts to become likely that it has to do with Pochettino. But the fact that it's been a week since Ten Hag's interview doesn't really mean anything. Things move slow at United. They have to go through one board, they have to go through another board, they have to get approved, they have to work out all the details, they've got to go back and forth, what coaches, what costs, what everything comes into play. All of that has to be considered, and when consensus is reached, then the decision will come out. And as part of that, they just want to do due diligence. They want to be certain. What if? Andy Mitten said this. They want to interview more. Talked about Enrique. There's a story yesterday from Mike Keegan at the Daily Mail about Luis Enrique. If they really like Enrique, if Enrique is one that both boards could just totally agree, we love Enrique, let's get Enrique in, then at least they're going to want to do some due diligence, because if they're not in 100% agreement on the other targets, and they are in him, they want to do some due diligence and see if they can talk to him just in case. And I think that's why you're seeing those kind of stories. Doesn't mean that it's likely, doesn't mean that it'll happen, but it is important to do the due diligence and make sure that if there was a totally top target, that they would be discussed at least and explored as much as possible. There was a new report today from someone from France saying that there's been more interviews with Pochettino, direct with the board. It's possible that that's the case. I think that needs more clarification. I don't think it's in person. I'm not sure. I believe Fabrizio Romano said we're talking to lawyers and people around him, and that is true. As I've said for a long time, they have been speaking to Pochettino. Anybody saying that United have not been speaking to Pochettino is wrong. Saying that they couldn't speak to Pochettino is wrong. The problem was more simply a formal interview, which I do not know if it's been held. There may have been still more informal interviews or vias done. I think they still want to have that interview, and we'll see if that happens. But the perceived delay that is out there, and I don't know that it's an actual delay, the perceived delay doesn't mean nothing's happening. It just means they're looking at all the aspects of appointing the next manager, doing their due diligence, looking at other options. It does not mean that Ten Hag is not happening, and he's still absolutely the front runner for the job as of right now. From Ten Hag's side, I've also heard communication is still occurring. They're just not sure exactly what the process is. So what you might be seeing is a little bit of maybe growing pains here, where United have not necessarily communicated directly to Ten Hag's side exactly what's going on as of yet, and that's leading to a little bit of pressure. I would say one thing I have heard is keep an eye on Rene Mollenstein. I know it was mentioned by Paul Hurst on Stretty News, the idea of a Dutch coach coming in with him. Keep an eye on Rene Mollenstein. If you start seeing stories there, that would be very interesting. I've just been told that, to keep an eye on that situation, and that there may be something in that. And that there's a chance he could come in, I don't know. But there's maybe some dialogue going on there, that's all. I don't actually have a lot of details. I've just been told that name specifically. I think that the next brief that comes out, not little leaks, little pieces here and there, but the next actual brief that comes out will tell us who the manager is, and it's still likely to come from The Athletic, based on how United operate. And right now it still has to be favored for Erik Ten Hag, but the other actions and looking into everything while working it out is still happening. Speaking of The Athletic, let's move on to transfers. There was a good article from Larry Whitwell last night detailing the transfer strategy for the upcoming summer and talking about strikers. And people keep bringing this point up. How can we look at targets before knowing the manager? Again, I want to make this clear. There are club targets. And one of the philosophies that the club is trying to move for is a less manager-driven transfer strategy. People think that it's all been club-driven. It's not. It's been manager-driven without a proper club structure in place. Managers have been the driving force behind most transfer choices until the last few, maybe year or so. A lot of the choices that were being made were based still off of Jose recommendations, even in Ollie's first summer. And prior to that, it's been a mix. It's been a mishmash. It's been a mess of individual opinions. They're trying to move on to club targets. If it was very manager-focused, Erik Ten Hag would not be in the running. He's liked because they want to bring him in as a coach, to coach the team, and that's the philosophy they want to go moving forward. He was not very involved in recruitment at Ajax, and he does not have that experience. So just understand that. It's about bringing a coach in, and they want club targets. And it's the same to some degree with player contracts. You see Bruno getting a deal. There's news today that the club want to extend Shaw and Rashford. Why? Because they're looking at the squad and saying, we want to play this way. This is the style. This is the philosophy. These are the players. These guys fit this. And as I discussed, Ralph and Fletcher have been involved in this. I described that in another video, evaluating the squad, what they do, who they like, who's going to fit into the style of play that they're looking for. And Bruno does, Shaw does, Rashford likely does as well. So that's why those deals are kind of moving forward regardless of the manager not being done, because they do fit into the style of play the club want to play that the coach is going to be there to carry out. So it doesn't necessarily require the manager, and I would also add that it's very likely both Ten Hag and Poch have been spoken to and indicated as part of the discussions players that they like, players that they would involve in the squad, at least in a basic setting. Okay? So that's why. In terms of transfers, what was stated in the articles, United want 2 midfielders and a striker and potentially a wide player. The transfer chart that we put out in February indicated this exactly. So who are these targets? In the article, it indicated Kane and Nunez. And if you've been following me on Twitter, following the articles and following these videos, you would know those are the 2 that I've been talking about for a long time. They are the only known viable candidates when you factor in cost, as well as their ability being appreciated. I believe that Osimhen was considered, but not possible because of being too expensive. I don't believe Jonathan David has been considered as a viable candidate, as being ready for the United position. When it comes to Harry Kane, it's difficult, but he has 2 years left in his contract this year. Next year, he's going to be very, very hard to sell for Tottenham. 1 year left, 30 years old. This is probably their last summer to cash in, so you have to look at all sides of it. If they miss out on Champions League, he's not going to go to City. I think they're getting Holland or João Felix as a backup. Where could he go? Where's he going to get Champions League? Nowhere. So the United job and position is still better than being at Tottenham for the long run, and it always will be. There's always going to be a draw at Manchester United for the top English players, and that will continue. So really, don't rule it out. It fits. I don't think it'd be 125, 150 million, something like last summer. I think they'd be forced to accept a realistic fee because next year they can't get much for him. And I think that's a consideration, but it's early. And then Nunez is a great, awesome prospect. I would prefer him. Available 60, 70 million, I believe. Scoring goals for fun in Benfica, scoring goals in the Champions League. He's doing it everywhere. I think they're looking for other targets, but have not found any that they really like in terms of profile and price. And that's why you're not seeing other names come up yet. But that doesn't mean they won't add more, be looking at more in the coming months. In the midfield, a second midfielder likely has to do a lot with the Jimmy Garner situation, as well as how much is spent on the first midfielder. If Garner comes back and is very impressive, you could probably rule that out. If they're not sure for next season, then Amadou Haidara, as I mentioned, would be a good one. He is, his release clause will be active. He's affordable. He's, again, in the mold of like a Fred, and that's the balance that they want moving forward. A deep midfielder, a Fred pressure, energy ball, move the ball forward and press high, and then an attacking creative midfielder like Bruno Fernandes. So that's the kind of profile of the midfield and style they're looking to build moving forward in the future. But the first midfielder, which is likely to be the main signing this summer, the priorities are Declan Rice. And Tchouaméni is a backup, and there are 2 more names that I would say are worth mentioning at the moment, which is Palhinha and Bissouma, who would be available for 30 million. So that midfield's going to be based on if they get the more expensive one, then probably not a second target. Jimmy Garner comes in and does well, probably not a second target. Declan Rice is the priority, and there's more to come on that. I don't necessarily think he'd be as expensive as people believe or has been reported, but it remains to be seen. And then following that, the last thing is if a lot of sales go through, Tony Martial, Van de Beek, who else is out there? Pereira, Matic, there's a lot of potential players moving on. Then you might see a wide player coming in who'd be affordable. I don't know who at this stage because the options are becoming limited. It's not going to be Dybala. Dembele is likely to PSG, Rafinha to Barcelona. I don't know. My hope is that, as I discussed in the last video, Pellistri can come back and nail down a spot. He's been very impressive for Uruguay, and he's been struggling to get into Alaves, but it has more to do with their style and manager than anything else. So that one is a little bit more to be seen. I would first focus on that DM and the striker, as that's going to be the key indications of what happens for the rest of the summer, and sales are likely going to be necessary following that. Okay, These are club targets. They're looking at building a philosophy that is based on a club philosophy that doesn't require necessarily specific manager targets and specific manager input on every single thing, even though they'll likely want to approve a transfer, of course, before it happens. So that's what's happening there. I will definitely continue to bring you the news on transfers, as regardless of how messy some other things can get, the information we've had on the targets, priorities, and all of that has been perfect and will continue to be perfect. It's an area I have a lot of confidence in. Okay? So thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, and I will see you in the next video.